Yeah, we're live. It is 8 after 8. So I'm an hour late. This is Super Richie Late Night After Dark. Tonight we're going to talk about something that I hope doesn't happen, but I want to get your guys' take on. In fact, we already have the poll up, and that's what the poll is about. Will junkyards soon become too expensive to find good deals on motors and parts and fade away? Like, do you guys think we're going to lose junkyards? Right, like right now, there are still junkyards out there that I go to all the time. Kind of my favorite place. I love them, which makes me think that because I like them so much, and we can go get good deals on motors. Like the thumbnail that I'm showing is a small block Chevy, so it doesn't matter what you're going to go get. You can go get a 3400 V6 or a 3800 supercharged deal. You can go get an LS. You can go get a small block, big block. You can go get a Dodge. You can go get a Magnum or a Hemi. You can go get import stuff, Honda motors, whatever you want. They're usually there at wrecking yards. But my question is will that go away? And I'll tell you why I think that. Long ago, back in the 2000s, 99 and 2000, when I was racing my Del Sol, you could go buy JDM motors. We were getting B16s at the time for $300. And I remember going and buying them, and we would use, those were our race motors, because the class that we were racing, they were supposed to be kind of stock with a header and an air intake. No, they were a little bit more than that. The good ones were. But that's what they all started out as. They all started out as this motor that you would just go buy from. We used to get them from K-Watt and Hobby back. K-Watt motors, that's what we called them. These were our race motors, and so we'd go get them from them. And I remember going there and seeing these warehouses full of these things, thinking, $300 for this, for a VORTEC motor? I mean, this can't continue. There's no way that it can. And sure enough, it didn't. If you go try to buy a B16 now, you're not going to pay that anymore. Now, obviously, a lot of things have gone up in price since 2000, but I have this same strange feeling about LS motors, and particularly, and I think more about, because for LS motors, because they're here and they made them in abundance, it would have to affect all of the motors that we could go get at a wrecking yard. And we're already starting to see prices climb with the conglomeration or the monopolization, basically, of, we're starting to see that for wrecking yards. We're starting to see prices go way up. It used to be that you could just go, I mean, the prices were really good, which is why we love the places. And then on like sale weekends, which they had every month or two or whatever, you could get like 50% off. So you go there, guys would go there and do a little pre-shopping, take stuff out, hide it somewhere. Like if they were getting an import part, they'd go hide it over in a domestic truck somewhere, so that nobody that's looking at that truck would go, oh, that's a Honda intake manifold. Nobody would care about it. But then you'd go get that on the sale weekend, and so you could get the good price on it. That's okay. I mean, they're making money off of it anyways, because they're parting out the vehicles. Same thing with engines. There were guys there I know that were way more gangster than I was. I mean, I can remember going there and getting 3 or 4 motors on a weekend, but they would go get that every day. And they would have trucks that were just full of these motors. They would just be yanking them out because they were like a reman place, or they were a shop that just was fixing these motors and then selling them to customers. And that's all great. That's what we want. We want those things. We want that stuff to be reused, and we want those things to be back on the road driving around. We want them to still be alive and doing what they do and making people happy. But somewhere along the way, the wrecking yard people realize that, hey, look, there are also people that are making a living off of this. They're going there. They're taking the parts out. They're buying them because they know the good ones. They know the ones that have value. They're taking them out, and then they're reselling them. They're reselling them on eBay or on Craigslist or whatever. They're selling them on Facebook Marketplace. They're selling them and turning a profit. And so I think that upset the powers that be for the wrecking yards, and they're like, we're obviously selling this stuff too cheap if somebody can come buy it from us and then resell it. But that's kind of the idea of wrecking yards, is that stuff is that you buy a whole car for a few $100s or $1,000, and then you part it out and you make more money on that. But greed has a way of doing that, and that's the problem. So unfortunately, the smaller mom and pop-ish kinds of places, I think that's what we would start to see first. Those would start to go away, get swept up, and then you'd have people making corporate decisions on pricing and all these things, and they would use competitive comparison information to find out, oh, what are these things actually selling for? And then heaven forbid, they should just go to and look at what an AutoZone rotor is, and then they essentially charge that for wrecking yard. Now, I don't think they could ever get to that point because, nobody's going to choose a used rotor over a new rotor. Obviously, they're not going to do that. So there's always going to be some price disparity, but not the great deals that we like. So I don't know. It just worries me that we won't be able to go down and get junkyard LS motors and make these 1,000 horsepower crazy things out of them like we can. I don't know that that's going to be forever. I mean, it's not just LSs either. I mean, I don't ever see any Coyotes there, but big blocks, small blocks, certainly lots of Dodge Magnums and stuff, 1UZs, Toyotas, and lots of Honda stuff, lots of Nissan stuff. So there are a lot of those, and and as the newer cars age, we start seeing newer and newer things come in there, and cooler different stuff. The LS stuff will eventually be supplanted by the LT stuff. I just don't think we'll ever get the LT stuff to have the popularity that the LS does. But there are lots of other stuff. There's, we still get small block Chevy stuff there. We still get big block Chevy stuff there. I still grab Dodge stuff there. I still would kind of like to get a 318. I don't know why. I haven't done anything with the 360 that I have for a long time, but we're definitely going to. But it's just cool to be able to go there and get, like, for me, it's the motors. A lot of guys like other stuff, but for me, it's mostly the motors. That's kind of my jams. I do like that you could see, if I ever found a Mustang with a T5 transmission, I think, oh yeah, that's really cool. I don't know if it'd be cool enough for me to grab. It might be. And then, rear end stuff, and suspension, all the car party stuff is good, but primarily engine stuff for me. That's the kind of stuff that I like. But let me know what you guys think. I'm curious to see what you guys throw around here for the poll, because it'd be sad if the wrecking yard was no longer except on sale weekends. Like, what I'm hoping doesn't happen is on sale weekends, it just brings it down to the price that we could have got it every day. And this sort of change is irrespective of tariffs or the political climate or any of that stuff. It has nothing to do with that. It has way more to do with, because these price increases are not cost of living things or inflation. They're not tied to that. They're because they started long before any of this other stuff happened. So they've been going up, and I think it's much more market adjustment relative to the cost of other things. And like I said, I think that they honestly just didn't like people going there and grabbing stuff and making a living off of stuff that they were selling. Like, basically they don't want middlemen kind of thing. And I don't understand it. They're still buying it from you. You're making money. They're coming and doing the work. They're making money. That's actually productivity. I mean, the government wants to see that because everybody has to pay tax on that anyways. So they want to see multiple sales like that so they could tax the heck out of the thing, which is, you guys can argue about that too. But that way they see a bunch of money. So it's I don't know. I just hope that it doesn't happen. I want to keep having, like I said, there's no place I'd rather go to. I'd rather go to, we're going to take a trip to Disneyland, I think, before too long. I'd rather go to wrecking yard, quite honestly. But that's just me. Let's see what you guys got going on. Jimmy we talked about that last night. Jimmy did testing on the Truck Plus. He is going to do the Trailblazer SS intake manifold. He's putting that on there. Maybe we'll have some stuff on that tomorrow to kind of see where it is, and then more turbo time. So it'll it'll be good to see what happens with the Truck Plus cam. The Truck Plus cam, that's the one that's on sale at richardholdnerperformance.com. So go check that out. That cam works well. What I'll be interested in seeing is once we get the thing, let's say after Jimmy puts the Trailblazer SS on there, I want him to drive it around, because this Tahoe has a stock converter. So I want to see how well it works with the stock converter with the tune that we're applying to this thing, and then how well the smaller turbo works, the GTX 3584 RS turbo. That's we've run that up to 800 horsepower, how well that one works, and then we'll put the bigger turbo on there too, primarily just to see response rates. Although, like since we're at 320 or 330 or something at the tire, that's quite a bit of power at like 15 pounds at one bar. That becomes quite a lot. Again, probably more than the 4060 is going to want to deal with. So I don't know. We'll see. We've got our fingers crossed. But it does have ring gap. It got our injectors. It got our 1,000 cc's on it. Has a pump in it. We'll also have to wonder about getting to we're not going to do this on this transmission. I was thinking we had to worry about getting to the flow limit of that pump on E85, but I don't think we'll get there power wise and have the transmission still be going, hey, yeah, I'm still here. I want to be in this let's party mode. I just don't think that's going to happen. Let's see what you guys got going on. Jet Dennis, what's got Koopy saying yes. Greetings. Australia Wrecking Yards ask a premium for used LS engines already. Yeah, that's probably that they didn't have nearly as many there, because you guys Australia didn't get trucks. So that's where we're getting all of our stuff. We're not getting ours from Camaros or GTOs or Utes or whatever. Holdens. We're not getting if all we had were Camaros and Corvettes and GTOs and stuff, they would the LS engine craze wouldn't be what it is. The reason that it is like that is because there were millions of trucks made. Got my LQ4 for 1,000 on Marketplace. Corporate yards won't sell a bare block anymore. Yeah, they do start changing rules like that, which is disappointing, because when I first started going over to the Wrecking Yards by VORTEC, you could just go buy anything. You could just take the whole thing apart right there, buy a block, buy a crank, buy a rod, whatever you wanted, you could do that. In Australia, the last cheap performance style engine, in my opinion, is the Barra 6-cylinder. We bought for $200. Nice. There's a glut of good used 6-cylinders here. LS is telling me about it. North Star engines are still cheap. VK56s are still sort of cheap. Where we go get the engines, all the engines are the same price. The only one that was different for some reason was a big block Chevy, like a 454 or a 396 or whatever. But all those other engines, an LS, a VK, a 6-cylinder, a 4-cylinder, whatever, all of those were the same price. I've seen some where they break it down by 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, and 8-cylinder stuff. Still rather have a Cleveland. Eventually, the LKQ or similar yards will become obsolete, as you can get new parts online for less than they usually charge with warranties and taxes that they add at the yards. They do try to put warranties on there, but I don't ever let them do that. Bear should be able to push 600 horsepower all day. The dog pound. How much does a Junkyard 5.3 go for these days anyway? Still, you can get them for a few $100s at places, I think. Just in case anyone would like to know, GM has made over 30 million LS-based engines since '97. So it should be good for parts. We just have to pay extra. Also remember not long ago getting my first Prius battery for solar battery banks for like 200 per car. Now they're north of 600. A local yard is already almost as expensive as new parts. Just in the last year or two, prices have almost doubled from what I've seen. Yeah, it's bad. YouTubers are driving the price up. Yeah, I probably have to take responsibility for some of that. Telling everybody what a great deal it is. And then unfortunately, a lot of parts here in Florida are more than new prices online. How could you sell a used part for more than a new part? Got two aluminum LS engines now, 5.3 and 6.2. The only thing that would keep prices down would be lack of interest in car culture. My dad was a boomer and a big car guy. I'm Gen X. It seems that there are far fewer car guys my age compared to boomers. I look at my millennial son, who's the only car guy in his friends group. Is $13,000 for a genuine Raptor with a 5.4 and fresh cam phasers, but due for a trans rebuild, a decent deal. Does anybody know for Cemetery Hill? 22. Most guys my age are not wrenching and building their own motors. Our guys are fading. I had to buy a different set of tools for the junkyards. They always put their dang marker marks all over my nice tools. I had enough. Oh, so you went and got the Pittsburgh stuff? My stuff is Pittsburgh anyway, so they can mark it up all they want. Oh my gosh, the yards in my state said dismantlers and junk and wreck were forbidden words. About 4 5.3s for $700 each. Most millennials and Zoomers would rather build a PC than a car. There's probably more money in that. So a complete 5.9 Magnum with accessories for $500. Seems like a good deal. Our local pull apart separates engines by cylinders. V8s for $390. That's a good deal. It's safe to run a Chupacabra cam with a turbo build. I'm willing to give up some power for a good idle. I've seen a lot of people saying don't do it. Thanks in advance. The turbo can be run with any camshaft. That doesn't matter. So if you like what the cam does in terms of the idle and stuff, that cam will have pretty good low speed response. It is going to have a choppy idle. So if you like that, then yes, it will work for your application. It will definitely work with a turbo. They all do. So if you like what the cam does, then it's a good cam. Just a few years back, you get complete engines for $300. That's how we used to buy them. We used to buy them complete, and they were from like flex plate to oil pan to air cleaner, to all the accessories, fan. I mean, everything. I think they basically just wanted most of the stuff gone out of there. Junkyard cars are way more common than, say, 5 or 10 years ago, thanks to the F-150 coming with them. So there's that at least. This is the best-selling truck. I've never seen one in a truck in a wrecking yard. On my look, because I wouldn't even look for, I've never even seen a Mustang there. But I have seen Ford trucks, but I've never seen a Coyote in one. On my local yard sells complete iron cores for $150 and aluminum for $250. The Gen 4 cores are pretty good deals usually. How big is the market for performance engines other than LSs? They're still taking lots of stuff out. LKQ's taken over. Have a lot of Harbor Freight tools. Which ones will go first? Junkyards or drag strips? Harbor Freight's come a long way. All of the workers I know love them these days. I have the set of Harbor Freight things that I got for the guys at WestTech that I use while I'm down there are still there, and they've been there for at least a decade, probably 2. And they're still all there. And then they still all work. And we've put breaker bars on them and all kinds of stuff. So it works. I pulled a 454 last weekend. Pulling out of a van is not good. That's right. Lots of sludge in the heads and lifter valleys. Saw some milky stuff too, but the cylinder walls look good. Got to check bearings. Yeah, if it has milky stuff, I just maybe a head gasket or something. Stephen Carter, what was your comment about the Truck Plus cam? US has more LS engines than we have people. I think there's a good market for fixing up used cylinder heads and reselling them on marketplace. I don't. I don't think you could take a stock cylinder head and put the. I mean, it depends on what you want to do to it. Are you going to do a valve job? Are you going to do porting? Are you going to do resurfacing? I don't think you can get the heads cheap enough to do all that and then sell them and then have people want to buy that. Old days pick and pull. Remember going to the one near Travis? My buddy waited until Thanksgiving weekend to get half price there. Yeah. I remember going to the ones out by Travis out on Peabody, and that's where we got our suspension for the Camaro that we had for my 70 Camaro. That was a long time ago. I've seen junkyard coyotes for 3 to 7. Definitely not cheap. KS cams are still on sale. More LS and engines than people. That particular, the thumbnail photo of the small block Chevy is one that we did a build on we put like ultra cheap heads on. I think they were Speedmaster heads, and then a cheap Summit cam. I'm pretty sure it was a flat tappet cam, and then a cheap intake and carburetor on it, and just use an HEI distributor and a non-computer controlled one, and it was just a cheap build-up deal. Worked good though. So the trans and ECM would make up 1/3 of 1% of the world's population. Should I put bigger valves on the Junkyard 454 I pulled along with bigger cam? 219 cam to Gen 6. I wouldn't worry about bigger valves. You're not at a point where you're with a 219 cam and a 454. You're not at a point where you're limiting the flow rate of the stock heads. What 383 would run best? Street strip traditional 383 or 400 small block D-stroke with a 350 crank and board 60 over? I don't know. I don't know how much power you're trying to make. And I think given the steam hole situation that most people would pick a traditional 350 block over a 400 block. They're harder to find. And I don't think you're going to find a 4-bolt 400 block. I have 50 wrecked trucks and SUVs in my backyard. My wife says I have to quit buying. Do they all have aluminum LSs in them? That would be cool. Will junkyards soon become too expensive and to find good deals on motors and parts and fade away? So 2/3 saying yes and 1/3 saying no. There are never enough great engines. The worst thing that would happen is they would get cheaper. Richard, do you have any videos on bore versus stroke, such as how the same size engine would behave if one was overboard and the other one wasn't? The only time I've ever seen anybody do a real bore versus stroke thing is Freiberger has done that. I think they did that in Engine Masters, and it really doesn't make a difference. If the displacement is the same, that's the big thing. And whether you get it at bore versus stroke, if the heads are the same and the cam's the same and the intake's the same and the carburetor or whatever is all the same, it makes pretty close to the same power. You're not going to see a big change from bore and stroke, as long as you can make all the other things the same. What's the best cam to put in a 5.3 to make the most power on a stock bottom end? You got to give me more information than that, because my guess is that you don't want to put the biggest cam in there. You're asking for the best, and the best one is not going to be the one that makes the most peak power, because it's going to be really, really soft down low. It's going to have limited piston to valve clearance. You won't be able to use it with a stock converter. It's going to be really soft down low. Probably will not have the highest torque output. So usually people have a list of things that they want to achieve, and I don't know that I've ever met anybody where I just want the highest peak horsepower number that I can get, because then the camshaft isn't the thing that's going to do that. You got to have really good cylinder heads. You got to have a good intake manifold. more compression helps, cam, all of that stuff, or the headers, all of that stuff. Ford has made at least 1.5 million Coyotes since 2011, based on my 2-minute Google search. I do have an all-aluminum 5.3 and an Envoy. Is it a LC9 or LH6 or something? I see a couple 400 blocks near me just about every week on Marketplace. I think there's still some out there. Yeah, 400 block is going to be from the late 60s or early 70s. So you just got to make sure that they're viable blocks. Be interesting to see how much little mods like bigger valves are actually worth. I wish I could afford a dyno session. Well, bigger valves, just like porting, may or may not be worth anywhere from anything, nothing at all, to a lot, depending on the rest of the test motor. So whatever thing you want to test them on, if you test them on a mild combination, things that add extra flow like that are not going to have big gains. Like a throttle body. You go from a 78 to a 90 to a 102 or 105 millimeter throttle body. The greater the power output, the more you'll see from the throttle body. It doesn't mean the throttle body doesn't work. It's that the rest of the motor doesn't need that throttle body. Put a big throttle body on a supercharged combination as a draw through. It makes a lot of power. Why would anyone want a 400 small block when 6 liters are available? My nephew got a Silverado with a 5.3 LT. I think it's an LS. It depends on what year it is. They both had 5.3s. One was an L83 or an L84, the later LT stuff, and the other one could have been any number of different LS versions of the 5.3. Do 400 blocks come with a Magnaflex guarantee? As everything gets older, it gets lesser quality and more expensive. They're not making 400 blocks anymore. They haven't made them small block 400s for a long time. There are aftermarket versions of Dart and those kinds of things that you could get. But my point is, just like with these nightmare big block Chevy heads that I went through from the 60s, that the castings are eat up. I mean, they're 40 or 50 years old, and they've been through a lot. And so a lot of the stuff is just not new and not good. What would be the cam for the most low-end torque for a small block 350 for a stock computer and piston and valve clearance? My comp cam 258, 264 didn't really help much over my stock cam. A 258 cam should gain power everywhere. You could go to a 252, or I think that pure energy cam is like a 246, I think. Let's see. It gained power everywhere over the stock cam. And again, it also is going to depend on what stock cam you're talking about, because there's lots of stock Chevrolet cams that were original equipment in the. Yeah, the advertised duration is 246, 263, so it's pretty small. It's a 203, 212. They do make one smaller than that. That's a 192, 200, but that's like a stock replacement kind of thing. Yeah, a 203, 212. I've run that camshaft before, and it did make more power than the stock one everywhere, from off idle all the way up to the top. Do you know much about Langenfelter CNC ported Edelbrock heads? I bought a pair off Marketplace. Too big or too small for a stroke 6 liter? No, they're fine. We in the big cylinder head test I did, we included those. Those are in one of the groups. Is DSS a good piston company? Yeah, I've used those back in the day for lots of Ford stuff, and it worked really good. The LT wasn't in 5.3, not too familiar with the engines. Yeah, they made a 5.3 is the base engine for LT. It's called an L83 or an L84. I have videos up where I ran one. I still have one. It's a 5.3. It has the LT style heads on it. It has the least amount of piston to valve clearance of any of the LT families, unfortunately. So you can't put big cams in them. The heads don't flow as good as the LT1 stuff does, nor do the intake manifolds. The good thing is to put an L86, which is a 6.2 truck intake manifold on it. You can also put the other camshaft in it, the stock LT1 or L86 camshaft in it. That works. BTR has cams for that. But they had the L83, and then they upgraded that later when they went to the LS2. They had the L84, which is the just later version of that 5.3. And it's variable cam, so it actually makes a lot of power. It's way more powerful than any of the factory LS 5.3s were. I don't know about soon, but considering the problems with newer engines, maybe eventually. My local yards are really inexpensive, but the prices keep going up. For every good 400 I've seen at least a couple of bad ones, either cracked. Yeah, cracked decks are common on the 400s. Talking about a model 454, the amount of change as the performance goes up. I'd like to see it. I like testing in hard numbers. Yeah, that's good testing. I just don't think you're going to see very much from doing bigger valves on a mild 454. Only because the stock heads are already pretty good. Got a response to my email. Looks like I'm going with a low buck truck or a ripper. Okay. Yeah, Jimmy should have taken care of that already. Simple question for you. LS2 truck motor, LS3 intake, 317 heads. LS2 was never put in a truck. Well, maybe a Trailblazer SS, but 317 head, stage 2 BTR cam. How much horsepower can I expect? I don't know what cam that is. And I want to know how you're running LS3 intake on 317 cathedral port heads. Please don't tell me that you're using adapters, because you shouldn't do that. You'll make less power than you would if you just put a cathedral port intake manifold on there. Richard, you just scold people for using advertised duration instead of the 50 number. No, not on the small block Chevy stuff. That's fine. Because we were looking at something really, really small. 427 small block Chevy on 2-bolt with a girdle pushing 650, ported VORTEC heads. What cam will keep this living? You're making 650 horsepower with a 427 with VORTEC heads? That seems like an awful lot of power for a ported VORTEC style head. Because that would mean that you have to be flowing 300 CFM from or more from that head. And I didn't know that they would do that. Controversial topic. I'd like to see Jimmy test injector timing on a Truck Plus. My butt dyno says adding exhaust opening or something improves low end drivability. Well, are you talking about part throttle stuff? Because the dyno does wide open throttle stuff. And I've never seen a change in power from at wide open throttle from injector timing. He could try it, but I think what you're asking though is drivability stuff, and that's not going to be measured on a dyno. And also, my question for the injector timing guys is, does the air fuel meter not work at idle and at part throttle? Because if you're worried about injector timing and you're changing the injector timing, isn't the air fuel going to change? If all that fuel is sneaking out the exhaust, which is what people seem to be worried about, or at least what they talk about, won't we see that as a change in air fuel? And if you add or subtract air fuel, if we make it richer or make it leaner, won't we see a change in drivability? I'm just asking the questions. Dart makes a 350 main 400 bore, no Siamese. Yeah, no, aftermarket blocks are definitely the way to go, but I think what he's talking about is a stock block. I believe my cam said 773. I don't know what that is. Oh, the stock cam that came out. only advertised duration is sometimes measured at different lift to fudge the numbers. Yeah, we normally talk about, in this particular instance, it wasn't a problem. Normally we talk about the 50 number, although import stuff isn't done like that. So I can't talk about RB cams or R2J cams or any of those with that kind of number, because they don't understand that, because it's not standardized. Who would be your recommendation for educational material on pairing torque converter and transmission gearing to engine builds? One of the converter companies, I guess. I haven't really gone down that road, so I don't know. Board spacing a 4.4 and a 4 on 25 board that only leaves 275 thousandths. Measure with a laser, mark it with a pencil, cut it with an axe. And then cut it. If it's too short, then cut it again, right? $23 million people live in Florida. Junkyard tip. When cars have been sitting there for years, they're trying to sell the glass on the Kia Sophia. Be the guy that chunks some new spark plug ceramics to the glass 3 rows over. How to solve an eBay cheap throttle body whistle? Replace it with a factory throttle body. I started up with a 454 that I honed to put new rings in for the first time the other day. Plugs are sooty black and it backfires through the carb randomly. Unknown condition of Holly 750. It sounds like it's rich. Or one of the common things, at least here in California and maybe other places if they have 91, is that 91, even when the air fuel is correct, the plugs will be black. It's just soot or some other contaminant that's not a function of the thing. Like we could tune it so it's 12/8 to 1, and there's still black stuff on the plugs. When you take them out and you look at them, you're like, oh, that's way too fat. But it's not. It's not too fat. It's just right. Could be that rich at idle. That's why we always have a meter on it. Screws are 1 turn out. That's close. I think what Brule screws them all the way in and it goes a turn and a half out and then adjusts from there. Is a 427 with ported VORTEC heads worth $550 with the right cam? I thought that we were talking about $650. And again, I don't know whose heads they are. I don't know who's ported them. I don't know what they flow. I don't know any of that. Unburned fuel doesn't show up on an oxygen sensor. Yes, under idle conditions, you can alleviate fuel smell on cam motors and even get slightly improvement in part throttle by altering end of injection. Here in Costa Rica, in a junkyard, is 1 off 2 days too expensive, or the junk is really cheap? Excited to see what Calvin does with a 5-cylinder Atlas. He just put one of them in his car. Isn't it just going to do 5/6 of what the 6-cylinder does? Stock block 400s are used up, at least here in the Midwest, until they're all 40 over. That's the other problem with some of them is I've seen guys sleeve them because the ones that were good and usable have been used and bored, and now they're bigger than you would want to put them together at, and so they re-sleeve them, and that's an expensive thing. Saw your video on spark plug gap. Do you have any updated thoughts on that? I need to pull my plugs. I figured I would try gapping them a little more. The only thing that I can tell you about plug gapping that works is put your plugs down around 18, 19, or 20 for boost. Otherwise, there's no benefit to changing the plug. Like if you run it at 35 thousandths, that's if it's an NA motor, you run it at 35 thousandths or run it at 45 thousandths. As long as you don't get misfire, you're not going to change a thing. Home ported VORTEC heads. Well, they need a steam hole put in it. If you're running them on a 400 block, you will. Throttle body whistle and a bad power steering pump equal an inexpensive blower. Just bought a standard bore 511 4-bolt main for 100. What's a 511? Is that a block casting number? Five-cylinder has a balance shaft. The 6-cylinder doesn't. Richard and Dan say facing spark plugs makes no difference. I'm satisfied with it. I can just tell you what the dyno says. I don't have an opinion about that either way. I just have dyno data. Here's what happened when we tested it. And we've actually tested that. I've tested that a number of times. I've taken plugs out, put them in different holes. I've put the plugs from the wrecking yard in and then putting brand new fancy plugs in, and they did nothing. So spark plugs is not, other than carrying a misfire, spark plugs is not where I would go look for power. Now, I didn't test them for emissions or fuel mileage or any like steady state cruise or any of that. Maybe that there's something there for plug gap or you know, electrode opening, facing, or indexing or whatever. Maybe there's something there, but there was nothing there for power. I was watching some of your older videos earlier, got me thinking over the last 5 years or so, what's the most surprising misconception that you had corrected by your testing? Nothing in the last 5 years. I think probably the biggest thing was the Big Bang stuff, but all that happened way before YouTube. Follow up to the spark plug question. How do you know what temperature spark plugs to get, or like gap? It really doesn't matter for NA motors. For an NA motor, I would put it at like 35. Quite honestly, I put it down low so that we make sure that we never get any misfire. Because if you run it at 25 or you're running it at 35 or 45 on an NA motor, it makes no difference. It doesn't do anything to power at wide open throttle. So I say let's put less gap in it, and then there's much less chance of ever having a misfire. And since it doesn't add any power by putting more gap in it, at least on the at wide open throttle on the dyno, it doesn't seem to do that. Again, for part throttle, maybe there would be something. You were exhausted in the spark plug test. I really got tired of doing spark plug changes. What was interesting is and Mark wanted this to happen so badly, and I think it was within the range of repeatability. But we put the copper core plugs in, the Autolite copper cores, and those made 1 horsepower or 2 horsepower more or something. So it's like, yeah, see, that old school stuff that works. It's just like, you know, guys telling you that points distributors are better and stuff. Lots of these aluminum heads you'll find online advertising for 400, and they don't have a steam hole in it at all, and they run fine. Okay, you get to do whatever you want, man. Had a Hughes since 1983, never a failure. And for boosted, is better copper or iridium? I don't think it makes a difference. I think what you're looking at in a choice between copper and iridium is the cost of the plug and then how long it lasts. We know that the copper is not going to last as long as a precious metal plug, as platinum or iridium, which is why we normally would run a precious metal plug in a turbo combination. 511 casting 2-bolt main on eBay. Didn't think a 2-bolt 511 casting existed. Would you change the stock pistons on a 68 302 and adding a set of twisted wedge heads? Not sure if I should dig into the bottom end since it's low mileage. Can I just add the heads? Yeah, you can just add the heads. It's fine. As long as you have the cam to go with those heads that doesn't have a piston to valve clearance issue, then you're fine. Read the comments on your plug video, and so many people claim better drivability with more gaps, so that's why I figured I would try. Yeah, I don't have, and the people that commented on that are commented that this feels like it's a lot better, and that's not scientific to me. So even if it is, even if what they're feeling is accurate, like there is something there, that's not scientific. that's not a test because it doesn't show that it's there. So I would want to see what that's doing, and I would want to quantify it. So like I said, I'm not saying that that's not a possibility, that part throttle drivability or emissions or fuel mileage or all of those things might not be a possibility, which is what I think that the OEMs are doing it for. So my guess is that it probably is something there, just not wide open throttle power is what I was testing. I'm hoping to pull the 302 and refresh it this winter. Less chance of misfire would be better. Yeah, I drove around with 20,000 gap on lots and lots of stuff, and it just works fine. I don't mess with steam holes. I plug and drill the big deck holes. Never had any overheating problems. Is getting 1.2 pound-feet per cubic inch common? Would you say 1.25 could be used to guesstimate the difference between 30 over big block Ford and an 80 over big block Ford? We do. You could do that if you know that the 547 was getting 1.25 per cubic foot-pounds per cubic inch, and you just want to extrapolate what 10 cubic inches would be. It's going to be 12 foot-pounds, 12.5 foot-pounds, and that's fine. You can do the same thing with specific outputs on horsepower. If that's making 1 horsepower per cubic inch or 1.2 or 1.5, whatever it is, and you go, okay, I've gone up 10 cubic inches, it's this much more horsepower. One of the issues with that is on that kind of displacement, that's not a big change, relatively speaking, because you're only talking about 10 cubic inches on 547 cubic inches. That's, from a percentage standpoint, that's not very much. So it probably will follow suit. But if you go from, let's say, a 350 Chevy to a 383 Chevy, and you're trying to keep the same specific output, let's say that you were making 1.3 horsepower per cubic inch out of your 350, and then you just take the heads and cam and intake manifold off the 350 and put it on the 383, it's not going to make 1.3 horsepower per cubic inch. Not that it can't, it's not because a 350 is better than a 383. It's not bore and stroke or any of that nonsense. It's just that it's bigger. If it's going to make that specific output, it's going to need more of everything. It's going to need more camshaft. It's going to need more head flow. It might not need any more head flow because the heads that you put on there might be 300 CFM AFR heads, so they might already be enough. But it'll need a little bit more cam lift or duration. It might need a little more compression, the head flow, the intake manifold, the carburetor, all that stuff for it to continue with that high of a specific output. And this is certainly the case with really, really elevated specific outputs. So if you're making 1.6 or 1.7 horsepower per cubic inch, it gets hard to maintain that when you're doing big jumps in displacement. I've seen some Clevelands making 2 horsepower per cubic inch. Yeah, they're having lots of head flow to be able to do that's good. And Cleveland heads or Cleveland style aftermarket heads can make a lot of power. And it's easier to make higher specific outputs with smaller motors. So if you take like the Cleveland that somebody mentioned, if you have a Boss 302 and you need it to make 2 horsepower per cubic inch, would be 604. It's easier to make 604 than trying to make a 351, which now has to make 702. So the head flow necessary to make 702 is different than it is to make 604. So it's easier to get a higher specific output on a smaller motor. What is a good TFS setup for us guys who want 300 or 340 horsepower 302, not a barn burner? Well, 340 horsepower on a 302 is trick flow, twisted wedge heads, a fairly mild cam, a dual plane intake manifold, and a carburetor. That's really easy. Boosted Coyotes make crazy numbers. Yeah, boosted stuff you can make. The horsepower per cubic inch is ridiculous with boosted stuff. Not just with Coyotes, with any motor. Best headers for small block Chevy 350 that don't block the spark plugs from being removed. If you know any, cheap summer headers are a pain. I don't know of specific headers for specific chassis that don't do that. I guess we saw that on the Engine Masters with 500 horsepower small block versus 500 horsepower big block. Well, and that's why, like, if you're going to, for instance, we talk about this kinds of stuff, we bench race this kinds of stuff all the time. So if you're talking about making lots of power with a smaller motor, you would choose a big block, because particularly if you were building, let's say the class limit was 400 inches or 300 inches. Cylinder heads that flow, it's easy to get a big block Chevy cylinder head that flows 400 or 450 CFM. That's not even that expensive. I mean, it's not cheap, but it's not as expensive as the head that you'd have to put on a small block to flow 450 CFM. So you do a big block with aluminum heads. You could do an aluminum block if you wanted to do it. Not that weight makes a difference at Bonneville, but it'd be a lot easier to do with a 400-inch big block and with that kind of head flow that you get, because that's really the key. That's the thing that you need before all the other stuff. Opinion on Frankenstein CNC 243 heads. I don't know. I've never dealt with the guys at Frankenstein at all. They look like they do good stuff. I've seen some of their stuff, but I never tested any of it. But by now, those guys do really good stuff, at least from what I've seen. But by now, I think it'd be sad if somebody now, given how long 243 heads have been around and how many different endless people have run CNC programs on them, we know what they can flow. They can flow 320, 330. And so they should be able to make it do that. I mean, because everybody's already done that. Stock 4 with Cleveland heads ported by Bob Glidden. For sure, boosted engines are insane. The heads that you're talking about for Glidden are not stock ported heads. I mean, they started out as a stock casting, but more than likely they were posted. They were also had the exhaust ports cut off and new ports put on. They're fairly extensively modified. Any crank triggers you recommend to use that don't have magnets fly out, drifting debris on the track, MSD? I don't know. That's not been my thing. I've never tried that. How do you feel about a head cam and intake 350 build, but use factory exhaust manifolds? Yeah, you can do that. You just make less power with stock manifolds than headers. But it doesn't matter that the heads in the cam and intake still add power. You just don't get as much without headers on it. We did the test of the Rotax on the Tahoe. How did it run on the street? Jimmy liked it. Thinking the centrifugal superchargers need better gear ratios compared with a turbo or root supercharger. You mean different gear ratios in the transmission or in the rear end? Yeah, they just don't have the same boost curve that a turbo does. Magnets flying out of crank triggers. Why does your reluctant wheel have magnets? He's talking about an external crank trigger. Get away. What's going on? Do these live feeds help get subscribers? That's not why I do it. I do it so that people will come here and get questions answered. Did a video of the process, very extensive mods on the stock 4V heads. I went down quite a while ago, I went down the Cleveland rabbit hole on some of that stuff. And I had no idea that they were doing that stuff, because you hear about that. Oh yeah, they ran Cleveland heads in Cup. They ran it in Pro Stock. They did it in all these things. And then you start talking to some of the guys. Like I've been lucky enough to know some of the guys that from Edelbrock that have done a bunch of that stuff from back in the day, and do like Trans Am stuff now, and to go back and read about all I had no idea that they posted those heads, that they put supports in there, because that they would they didn't have enough support. And so they would go in and put that in, and that's a lot of work. And then they would just basically cut off that, a big chunk of that rear section so that they can make the exhaust work. Because otherwise the exhaust, it had really good intake flow, but not good exhaust. Look at ram's horns. Getting much closer to having my motorized bicycle running. Was welding the frame on the live stream earlier. People subscribe every time. I don't know why. Nice. Didn't weld it up and re-chamber those heads, obviously, too. Obviously, other than welding cast. Yeah, and they probably did do that. They probably did some really cool. In fact, probably the work that they did on those iron ones are what eventually became the aluminum versions of those heads that Ford was selling, I would imagine. Do you think CNC chambers are worth it? Yes, combustion chamber design is critically important for power production. But I don't know, as a universal thing for CNC porting any combustion chamber, no. For doing that on the right head and engine family, yes. We weld and CNC, regrind it to a modern heart-shaped combustion chamber way back in the 60s. Yeah, they knew how to make power. You know, I think junkyards are simply going to get expensive, but I think they're going away. Worry about government regulation blocking us from them. Have you ever done anything with a 3.5 short star? Is that a North Star motor or something? I haven't done anything. I haven't ever dyno tested a North Star motor. I've seen them run at WestTech on way back when they were kind of popular for sand rails and stuff. I've seen them run, a few of them run on the chassis dyno, but I've never run one on an engine dyno. 547 P51 heads. What duration do you think is needed to have peak torque at 3,300 to 3,500? 230 is too big for that. No, not on a 547. I think the other thing that you need to be thinking about besides camshaft is intake manifold. Junkyards near me closed down because they want to deal with people and the EPA. I have a question. Is my concern of no intercooler legitimate? 509 big block centrifugal on pump gas, Holly HP. I'm annoyed that customer won't put a brick on the intake on pump gas. Old timer that's stubborn. Is it it's a centrifugal blower, Joel? I don't know why he should put an intercooler on if he's running pump gas, unless he just wants to make very little power. I never ran we tried running an intercooler on my VORTEC on my Mustang, but that was fuel injected, and we did a fairly good job of tuning it. I even ran it in the Silver State, but I was only running 7 pounds though. Dual plane on a 547. Yeah, that will make torque happen pretty early. Engineering goes all the way down to registers initially being all zeros. CNC Chambers was on 243s. Yeah, most of the guys, Total Engine Airflow and all those guys, they all do CNC Chambers as part of their porting process. And CNC chambers are a big part of getting it to flow and getting it to make power. I was just talking to Brian Tooley about that the other day. Then the guy who laid his motors upside down and on concrete. Short Star is a V6 loosely based on the North Star. I don't know anything about it. Got a 5.3, the Truck Norris cam. Excellent choice. And rods, my 862 heads were bad. Swapped out for 243s. Did I mess up? I got them half off at the junkyard. No, you wouldn't notice the difference between those. You could mill those heads and then put them on and be happy. I had to narrow down the most effective improvement on an LS over a small block Chevy. Would it be the heads, the intake, the metallurgy, or perhaps something else? It's not one thing. They did something better on everything. There's no small block Chevy head that flows what an LS head does. What even the most pedestrian LS head does. Even a 706 or 862 head. There's no small block Chevy head that flows that much. Maybe an LT4, but none of the production heads are like that. And so that's one thing. The intake manifold is way better also. it has a factory windage tray. Although there were some windage trays on some of the on the Chevys. Yeah, there's lots of stuff. One of the standard pushrod V6, essentially with an OEM aftermarket solid overhead cam kit. Pretty sure that's it. Mike, are you talking about the high feature V6? Tim and WJ Rocket Science. What are problems you see with factory L83 heads, and what would you recommend for improving them? They can be ported. There are guys that port them. That they just don't flow anywhere near what the LT1 and L86 heads flow. You're thinking of a twin dual cam. People call the new DI36 the high feature. The Frankenstein engine. Yeah, I've done stuff on the 3.4 liter on the twin dual cam motor. Over here, just rapping about Cleveland's. High feature engines came out after GM abandoned the 3100, 3400, and 3800. Do you have any small 302 Windsor cams for sale? I don't know. I'd have to look and see. Something like a 212. I can look and see. It's my favorite kind of racing. I don't really watch much racing. The stuff that I like to participate in is Bonneville right now. Are there any intakes and headers for a 351 Cleveland that work in a 70 Mach 1? If that motor came stock in that chassis, then yeah, there are headers. Hooker used to do some headers for that. How much does oil in the crank affect horsepower output? Like having too much oil slowing down the crank? If you're talking about it hitting windage from the oil in the pan, that's one thing. If you're talking about like pressurized oil from the oil galleys and stuff, then not very much. You and Brian need 101. 70 Mach 1 has Primo. My dad has 69. I like the way those look. Those things are nice looking. I hated the GM twin dual cams. I could buy either of those cars under 1,000, but I don't think I will, knowing that they have a fancy engine. You can buy what for under 1,000? Just check the price on the Kazi P51 heads. Yeah, those are not cheap. Would your turbo work for 500 at the tire on a 4.8? Yeah, it'd be perfect for that. SB2 stuff is good. Truck Norris and nitrous stock Gen 3. Yeah, that's fine. You can run nitrous with any camshaft. It doesn't matter. And on any LS, it doesn't matter. It's better to add ring gap if you're going to run a lot of it, but 69 Mach 1, 69 SS Chevelle special year. Yeah, I like the 70 Chevelle better. But the 69 Mach 1 I do like, although I like a 69 and 70 Boss 302 better, but Olds Intrigue or Aurora. Yep. I like the SB2-2. We get 900 out of those. 3.4 twin tool cam has the weight of a V8 and the power of a V6. Yeah, it's not a good combination. So we're going to close our poll at 71% saying yes. They think that they're getting too expensive, and we have 1 minute. But it has so many cams. Yeah, it's got 5 of them. How much nitrous do you think is safe enough through a plate before you need to step up to a fogger? That's not what decides it. You need to look at the NA power output of the motor and determine how much nitrous it can take. And then you need to determine what system you want to apply that with. We've run 300 shots on carbureted LS junkyard motors. The oil pump drive that you had to take the head off to fix the oil leak. How big of a difference an eighth time is a timing curve with a faster ramp versus a slower ramp, considering timing, etc. All that is good. I don't know. I don't know how to answer your question. I don't know what the timing is in one instance and then what the timing is in another instance. If you launch the car at 3,000 RPM and all the timing is already in at 3,000 RPM, you can't make it come in any quicker. If you have full advance, let's say you have a small block Ford and you have 35 degrees, if you have 35 degrees, it's all in by 3,000 and you're launching it at 3,000, you just have all the timing in all the time. So it doesn't do any, there's no curve there. There's no curvalicious. And on that note, it is time to go. See how fast this goes by when everybody's like having fun? It's all good stuff. But I will see you guys all tomorrow.